Put your hands up. We about to do it. Everybody want to get your hands up. I don't really care. Put your hands up in the air for the podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the So Good It's Bad podcast with your host, me, Chaim Samuels. Woo! We're here. We did it. Starting a podcast. Another guy starting a podcast. That's exactly what you need in your life. I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited going into 2022. Particularly because I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm at a really good starting point. You know, as probably by the time I post this, I'm going to have at least 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. And I feel like that's a good place to start. It feels good having that little amount, you know? Having that thing. It's like a nice small package. It's like, okay, I got this. You know, this feels good. I can go into 2022 feeling as if I have a good starting point, you know? I know being as someone who's trying to pursue something creative with his life, you know, try to be an actor, try to be a filmmaker. I'm sure a lot of people could relate to this. If you're ever trying to do something that's particularly a creative space, you know that a lot of times you could feel almost as if you're running in one place. I know that I did stand-up comedy for a little over 5 years, and I'm going to get more into my experience in stand-up comedy where I am now, but I did stand-up comedy for a little over 5 years, maybe even 6 years, and I mean, just such small increments that you feel like you're moving. At least for me, it felt like it really, if you don't love it and you're not incredibly passionate about it, it could really burn you out. Which is actually what it did, and I'm going to get more into that in the podcast. I hope the mic doesn't pick up so much on my drinking noises. That's always what people want to hear in their ears on the way to work. So yeah, I thought for this podcast what I would talk about, and I've had a lot of people come up to me when I told them that I'm starting a podcast. They all ask the same thing: what is the podcast going to be about? Which gave me a little bit of anxiety, you know, because as somebody who has a YouTube channel, I don't know if there's a particular thing that this podcast is going to be about. I don't know if I'm going to speak particularly about one thing. You know, I don't even think that many podcasts have one particular thing that they talk about. I know a lot of my favorite podcasts, or a lot of the podcasts that I listen to, have an array of things that they talk about. I mean, obviously, famously, the Joe Rogan podcast, he has a new guest on, and you never know who's going to be, and they talk about a different subject. Other guys, like Flagrant 2 with Andrew Schultz and Akash, if I'm pronouncing his name right, they talk about whatever's, you know, popular. You know, you got Cody Ko, you got so many different people starting podcasts, particularly with either they're a comedian or they have a YouTube channel, and they're just kind of talking about whatever they want to talk about. With me, I think if I were to pick one general thing that I'd like to discuss in my episodes in the podcast, would be that I want to talk to artists, and I want to talk about art, and I want to talk about movies and things that I'm passionate about. But I don't know if I'm going to just particularly do that one thing. I also want to get into my religion, my religious background, and talk to people in the community. Sorry for the noise in the background, guys. This is obviously not $1 million setup, and I live right across from a fire station, so I'm sorry for the noise. Maybe I'll try to clean that out in the editing, even though I don't really know what I'm doing. But anyways, getting back to what I was saying before. So I think for the most part, I'm going to talk about things that I'm passionate about, which usually is movies and films. And I'm going to talk to different comedians and actors and people that I've met over my journey of trying to create a life of creativity for myself. But I thought for this first episode, what I would particularly talk about was myself, of course. It's my podcast. I can do whatever I want. And I want to get into my personal experience, where I'm holding right now, and what I want to do for the future. I think generally for this episode, I just want to talk a little bit about my experience in stand-up comedy and my experience now trying to pursue acting and being an actor and filmmaking and my YouTube channel and the podcast and all that stuff. So that's what I'm going to particularly talk about in this episode, because if you've been following me on social media throughout these many years of doing social media and YouTube and all that stuff, you know that I don't particularly put my personal life out there. I don't understand people that do. I don't get vlog families that go out there and they have a camera and they film everything of their personal life. I don't understand how people can do that. The older I get, the more I appreciate my privacy. The more I appreciate not particularly putting my personal life out there. But I thought with the podcast, it's a more of a long form thing. I thought, you know what, I'll talk a little bit more about my personal life. Maybe I'll get into that. So I thought this first episode, I want to talk about my experience in stand-up comedy and why eventually I decided to quit and start acting. So, just a little bit of my background. If you're familiar with my channel, you know I'm not shy about talking about the fact that I grew up as an ultra-Orthodox religious Jew. Now, let me paint a picture for you guys. And I promise that there's a reason why I'm talking about all this, because it comes into play from why I decided to leave stand-up comedy and why I decided to become an actor. But I grew up as an ultra-Orthodox religious Jew. And from 7th grade until I was about 19, 20 years old, I went to an all-boys school. I went to an all-boys yeshiva and all-boys camp. And I was an ultra-Orthodox religious little boy, you know? And there were two things throughout school that I wanted to do. Pretty much just two things. That was party and have a good time and become a super famous actor. Those were pretty much the two things. Learning was really not on the table, which really sucked because when I was in school, I guess you could say high school. It works very differently in yeshiva. That's like rabbinical school. I'm not going to get too much into how it works, but let's just say high school. My experience in high school was that the class above me and the class below me, they were the party classes. They enjoyed having a good time. And I was stuck with the one class that enjoyed learning and would sit and loved learning stuff, which sucked, which really sucked because, again, I wanted to party and have a good time. And I didn't really get to do that. And so, skip to when I'm 19, about to turn 20, I finally finish rabbinical school and I move out to New York into an apartment with a couple of my friends that I had known from school. Now, my goal, again, because I wasn't able to do this during yeshiva, was twofold. One, I wanted to get laid. Pretty much that's what it was. I wanted to be able to talk to girls. I grew up in an only boys home, so my experience with women, going to an all-boys school, all-boys camp, and not having any sisters was so minute. I was awful talking to women. I was the weird guy at every party. Every girl knows this. She doesn't understand men. Let me give you a little idea into what goes into our heads, because men are the ones that have to really go out and get the rejection from the ladies. And so if you don't have a good social skills and you didn't grow up with that like I did talking to women, you have to kind of figure it out on your own. There's not really a lot of people that are going to sit you down and help you out. There's no courses you can take in college. You know what? There should be, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, maybe sociology is the closest thing to it. But anyways, I digress. So I didn't have an experience talking to women, and I was always the weird guy in every guy group. Girls would come over to my place, and they were friends with my roommates. My roommate had way better social skills in talking to women, and he would bring over his friends and a couple of girls, and I would be the weird guy in order to try to be interesting, because I could barely hold a conversation with a girl without totally freezing up. I do weird things to get attention. And again, I think all girls know this. They go to a party or they hang out with a group of friends. There's always that weird guy doing weird stuff. And that's particularly the reason why. He's nervous and he doesn't know how to talk to girls, and it's the only way that he can get their attention. So I'd go in the fridge and I'd grab like whipped cream and I'd spray it all on my face and be like, "Hey, look at me." Not my finest moments. But, okay, anyways, I digress. So my first year in New York was I want to get laid. My second goal was I wanted to do stand-up comedy. And I wanted to do stand-up comedy, and this is where everything kind of comes into play with me and why I decided to quit stand-up comedy. Because throughout school, my entire identity was I was the funny guy. That's kind of how I identified with myself and how I identified with the world. I had a pretty low self-esteem, and I felt like in every interaction, I had to be the funny guy. And if I wasn't the funny guy, then I wasn't myself, and I didn't feel good about myself, which honestly could be incredibly exhausting. That's an incredibly exhausting life, where you always feel like you need to be funny. And it was. And I had a lot of, I was really, really self-conscious during my teen years. Incredible. God, man, I had so much anxiety, social anxiety. And so I felt like the only way that I could really interact with people and get people to like me was being the funny guy. That's what people knew me for. And when I finally moved out to New York, I felt almost a need to do stand-up comedy because I had to prove not only to my friends but to the world that I was funny, or else I didn't really matter. That's kind of where my starting point was, doing stand-up comedy. That's not a good place to start doing something or pursuing a life of something, or specifically when it comes to like something creative or something like that. That is not a good mindset to go into it, saying I need to do this in order to feel like I belong. Which is, funny enough, that is like what I think most comedians or most actors go into doing something. They go, this is the one thing that makes me fit in, so I feel like I have to do it. So that was kind of my mindset. And it really did drive me. It really did motivate me. And I can't say that I regret at all pursuing stand-up comedy, but that was my mindset going into it. And 5 years later, suddenly, I'm starting to get burnt out. I would say this is about a year and a half ago, maybe a half a year before the pandemic all started and everything like that. Was that 2 years? I don't know. Jesus Christ. But let's just say, oh yeah, by the way, if you're interested, I did get laid. So, yeah. Bucket list checked. But anyways, getting back into my personal experience with stand-up comedy. It's about 4.5, 5 years later. And the passion that I had when I started doing stand-up comedy, where I was doing like open mics every night. There was a point where I was really trying to get better and writing new material and really working on it to where I can say that I started to do shows, which was really cool. That was a really cool story in itself, how I started to get shows, because I'd been doing open mics for like 3 years. And open mics versus shows is, open mics is where you try out material in front of other comedians, and shows is people come to pay to watch you to do stand-up comedy. And there's a huge difference. And I was starting to get pretty jaded because I wasn't getting any shows. And I'd look around and see other comedians getting shows, and it really, really bugged me. And I remember one day I was on Facebook, and I saw somebody saying that they're willing to book people for different shows, and all you got to do is really just bring 1 or 2 guests. And that's called a bringer show. And to me, that sounded pretty reasonable. And I remember meeting Julius and his wife, Kim, and they started to book me for different clubs. So that was a really cool experience. And I finally was able to get out of just doing open mics. So, yeah, anyways, that little tidbit. So getting back into the story in general, it's about 5 years later, and I went from doing open mics every night to writing a ton of material to trying to get on every single show to just maybe doing 1 show a month. I would get on stage 1 or twice a month, and I wasn't even doing open mics anymore, and I wasn't particularly writing new material. And I noticed in myself that I was starting to lose the passion that I had when I came into doing stand-up comedy. And it definitely was frustrating because my goal I started to think about what my goal was for doing stand-up comedy, why I was getting burnt out, and what I could do to fix that. And I tried to do a lot of things. Actually, I don't know if I tried to do a lot of things. I don't know why I'm saying that. I don't know. Let's just say that I was doing stand-up comedy, and I was really starting to get burnt out to the point where I was maybe doing one show a month, getting up on stage one show. And let me just tell you guys, if you're planning to do stand-up comedy, you need to get up on stage almost every single night. Stand-up comedy is absolutely brutal, and if you want to get better, it's something that you consistently need to do. It's a really tough thing. So I would see comedians who seem to be really passionate about becoming a stand-up comedian, going out like every night and doing comedy and booking shows, which was really depressing. Throughout my entire time doing stand-up comedy, I don't know if I ever made any really close friends. Which is really depressing saying that out loud. But I never felt like I fit in with the stand-up comic, the whole community. I never felt like I fit in. I always felt I felt out like an outcast. I never really felt like I belonged. I don't particularly like comedians, to be completely honest. I don't, now I'm going to get into like comedians versus actors, but my experience, I know I'm jumping from topic to topic, but there's a lot to say and not a lot of time to do it. But let me just digress a little bit and talk about my experience. Stand-up comedy and comedians, in general, I don't particularly enjoy comedians. I don't like talking to them, at least the ones that I met doing open mics and doing shows and stuff like that. More of the comedians that actually made it and had a little more success usually were actually the nicer ones. It's the ones that I met at open mics that were pretty much at my level who I just didn't enjoy talking to them. A lot of them are really jaded. A lot of them are really introverted and have a lot of social anxiety, and I always felt as if it was almost impossible to talk to them or relate to them. They just weren't my people. Let's go with that. They weren't my people. And look, I did meet some really cool comedians. I don't want to paint this brush of all comedians are like that, because I did meet some really cool people. And when I started doing stand-up comedy at first, and maybe it's because I had like this passion to do stand-up comedy, I did meet a couple of comedians that I actually became friends with, and we would do shows like we would go around and do open mics, but that didn't last for that long. And I remember over the years, rarely did I ever make any friends, and I definitely didn't make any close friends. I never felt like I was a part of the stand-up community, which was really frustrating. And a big part of doing stand-up comedy and booking shows is knowing people. So I'd look around at other comedians, and they would talk about how they got like 6, 7 shows booked for that month, 10 shows booked for that month. And I'd be like, how the fuck are you guys booking this many shows? I'd have one show, and it would be that by this lady I met on Facebook who was booking people for shows, and they weren't even particularly shows that I was really getting booked for. It was just that if I wanted to get on stage, I needed to bring somebody, so they were bringer shows. So it wasn't even shows that people were booking because they liked me as a comedian, or because I didn't make any friends. And a big part of comedy and a big part of getting up on stage is becoming friends with other comedians who run shows, and they book you on their show, and that's what the comedians around me would be doing. But I just didn't have that. I wasn't booking any shows. So that was really depressing. So again, 5 years later, I'm maybe doing one show a month. I don't have any friends or good friends in the comedian world. It felt pretty depressing. And I started to really get burnt out and lose my passion for doing stand-up comedy. And I was constantly questioning why this was. And instead of deciding to just quit, it almost was like, I felt like I couldn't quit. I felt like there was still that same mindset. Again, sorry for the noise in the background. There was that same mindset that I had starting off with, that I needed to continue to pursue stand-up comedy. Because I felt almost as if I wanted to become an actor, I'd first have to become a stand-up comedian and become successful first, and then I could leapfrog over to doing acting. For me, stand-up comedy for a while was a bridge for me to leap over and get into the acting world, which, again, that's also not a great reason to pursue something, especially when it comes to stand-up comedy. You pursue stand-up comedy because you want to be a stand-up comedian. But I wasn't doing that. And I kind of knew that in the back of my head. And the more I became more burnt out and jaded, stand-up comedy became more of a burden as opposed to something that I was really passionate about. And I think I started to realize that about a year ago, a year and a half ago. But I still kept holding on to this idea that I needed to continue pursuing stand-up comedy because I already put like 5 years into doing stand-up comedy. I felt like if I was going to throw that away, I'd feel like I'd be throwing that away if I stopped doing it. And it really did take me a while to finally decide that this wasn't making me happy. And what I really wanted to do was acting. That's really all that I wanted to do. And I think the reason that I felt like I needed to start doing stand-up comedy was because I needed to prove to everybody that I was funny. But I wasn't in that place anymore that I needed to prove to everybody that I was really funny. I'm not in that place anymore. I'm a little more confident in myself, and I don't feel like every interaction I need to crack jokes in order for people to like me. And so there was kind of this separation between why I started doing stand-up in the first place and who I was now. And I started to realize that this is not what I wanted to do. And during that time period, a friend of mine, an independent filmmaker, offered me a role for one of his movies. And I remember getting the script and practicing and being in his movie. And all throughout that process, there was this passion that I'd been missing for so long that reinvigorated me. It was incredible. It was really an amazing experience. Stand-up comedy, I felt like it was like a hindrance to my creativity. I felt like it was just a need that I had to do it. And when it came to this acting gig, there was that passion and fire that maybe I had previously when I started doing stand-up comedy. And that wave of passion came back, and it made me realize, no, this is what I want to do. I want to do acting. I want to do filmmaking. And I really knew that in the back of my mind. When it came to stand-up comedy, I always kind of knew that I wasn't going to do stand-up comedy forever. It was kind of a means to an end. And pretty recently, maybe about 6 months ago, I decided to officially quit doing stand-up comedy and pursue a level of acting. And since then, to be very honest, I've been really happy. I've been much happier, and I feel a lot more productive. And I don't feel bad for quitting stand-up comedy. And it took me a while to finally break myself off from that, but now I feel really good. And I'm working on my YouTube channel, and I'm creating skits and different episodes now on my YouTube channel where I feel really, really good about. And I think it's the first time in my life where I'm actually creating videos or creating art that I'm really, really proud of. And I enjoy saying that I have this right now. So, yeah, that was kind of my experience with pursuing stand-up comedy and now getting into acting. And I did an acting class, which is really, really cool. And to say the difference between acting and comedians, and you know what? I shit on comedians a lot, but maybe it's just because I don't relate to them. It's just not my crowd. 5.5 years doing stand-up comedy. I don't know if I made one friend. I made maybe acquaintances, but I don't know anybody that I'd hang out outside of stand-up comedy. I took an acting class about a month and a half ago. 3 classes in, I made friends with a group of actors, and we hang out now like once a week, and we talk all the time. Literally, like 3 classes in. It's so ridiculous. So I guess it was just about what I was passionate about, and the type of crowd and people that I wanted to hang out with. And I was going to spend this entire episode talking about shitting on comedians and saying actors are so much better, but I think it's just who you enjoy being around and the type of people you enjoy being around and what you can relate over. And I think with comedians, I couldn't relate to what they wanted to do. And with actors, I 100% do. And it was so cool making friends with actual actors because I always felt like when I was doing my YouTube channel and trying to put together skits and stuff like that, trying to get other comedians to be a part of it always felt like a struggle. And almost I felt like they never wanted to be a part of these skits, which made sense because they didn't want to be actors. But I wanted to be an actor. And I felt like, oh, they would want to be a part. They would want to be doing what I was doing. But I guess that wasn't the case. But meeting these actors, immediately when I told them that I had this project I was working on and I need actors, they were all excited to be a part of. And immediately, like, I was able to work with them. It wasn't a struggle at all. They had their schedules open, and I was able to work on a really cool project that's on my channel right now called The Wrong Hole. It's a parody of The Twilight Zone, and it's this episodic show where every episode, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone. It's kind of like The Twilight Zone, which I love, but it's kind of a parody where every episode is something silly and funny. So overall, pursuing acting, there's this huge weight that was kind of lifted. Now that I don't feel as if I need to do stand-up comedy, I get to do what I pretty much want right now. And so that's kind of where my mindset is at this point and why I decided to quit stand-up comedy. Now, going forward in the future, what would I like to do this year in the 2022? I'll just go into a brief synopsis of my goals for this year. My goals for this year is that with my YouTube channel, I want to do more episodic shows. That's what I wanted to do with my YouTube channel, which I've started. I've already done 2 episodic shows that I've started. One, the Moses Vlogs, which is, I don't know how many parts I'm going to be doing, but it's an episodic show where Moses vlogs his journey going into Egypt and freeing the Jews. It was an idea that I came up with while I had COVID a few weeks ago, and I was in my room going absolutely insane, and this idea kind of came to me, and the words just kind of flowed out of me, and I was able to put it together, and I think it was like the first project that I absolutely just fell in love with, that I felt like I needed to put this out there. It was a really great feeling. And the second one was what I just said, The Wrong Hole, which is, again, an episodic show that I just posted the first episode. You go on my YouTube channel right now. And I'm really excited to continue to make more episodes for those shows. And I'm also going to do small skits and stuff like that also that are just by themselves. But that's my first goal, that I want to do more episodic shows. I think I'd like to also pursue acting more realistically and build a resume for myself. So this year is going to be, I'm going to build a resume for myself and try to take as many acting gigs as possible and build up a decent resume that then after that I can show people and say, okay, this is what I've done throughout the year. So it's building my YouTube channel and building my acting career to a place where that I can show people this is what I've done. So those are my 2 main goals when it comes to what I want to do passionately. And of course, oh yeah, how can I forget? The podcast, which I've just started. I'd like for this podcast to be something that I continue doing, and hopefully it grows. And so, yeah, those are my goals for the 2022 year, and I feel really, really good about it. I feel I think the first time, really clear-headed and a very good understanding of where I'm headed in this career of mine that I'm trying to build for myself. And I think that's a really good feeling. And for the first time, I'm really creating things that I want to create. And it doesn't really feel like work. I mean, there's definitely work involved. Sometimes it does. But overall, I am actually pursuing some passion of mine that I really believe in. And, maybe the next goal also would be I want to make a short film. Like, I've really been passionate about getting into directing, and I really do enjoy it. And working with those actors, I can tell you there's a huge difference between working with bad actors and good actors. Holy crap. Working with these guys, they were fantastic. I had such a good time directing. It was just this really great feeling. So I'd like to do more projects with directing and working on more projects like that. So those are my goals for the 2022 year. And I promised for the next episode of the podcast, I'm probably just going to talk about something I'm passionate about. I'll probably talk about a movie or director, etc. I already have an idea for that. But overall, that's kind of my life in a nutshell. And that's my life going into the 2022 year. And that's the first episode of this podcast, guys. I hope you took anything out of this. And I hope this sounded interesting to anybody listening. I hope this made sense. I hope this wasn't too choppy, and I hope people were able to follow it. And yeah, you know what? This is the episode I'm going to stick with. And thank you guys so much for listening. Stay tuned to episode 2. It's probably coming soon. And enjoy the rest of your day, you guys, because you deserve it.